To understand the world, you must first look deep into the core of what makes us human. Join our exploration of love, hate, and everything in between through the power of cinematic narrative. Click subscribe now and join us as we get to the core. The night my granddaughter grabbed my sleeve and whispered those words, I felt something cold move through me that had nothing to do with the November air. Grandpa, don't let him inside the house. I heard him on the phone. He said, when you're gone, everything becomes his. She was 9 years old, and she was the only reason I'm still here to tell this story. My name is Walter. I'm 67 years old, retired after 34 years as a structural engineer for a commercial construction firm in Portland, Oregon. I built bridges, hospitals, parking structures, things meant to last, things meant to hold weight. I believed in solid foundations. I believed that what you built with your own hands reflected the kind of man you were. I believed that about my son-in-law, too. For 11 years, I believed it completely. My daughter, Claire, met him at a company conference in Seattle when she was 29. He was charming in that quiet, deliberate way that I mistook for sincerity. He had good posture and a firm handshake, and he looked me in the eye when he spoke. Her mother, God rest her soul, used to say he had kind eyes. I thought so too back then. Claire and he got married in the spring. I walked her down the aisle. I gave the toast at the reception. I meant every word of it. When Claire passed 4 years later, a brain aneurysm, sudden and completely without warning, I thought my world had ended. She was 36. She was the best person I have ever known, and she left behind a little girl named Rosie who had her mother's laugh and her mother's way of tilting her head when she was thinking hard about something. In my grief, I made a decision I thought was generous. I invited my son-in-law and Rosie to come live with me in my home in Portland. The house was too big for one person. Rosie needed stability, and he, I'll call him my son-in-law because that is the only name that matters for this story, had lost his job during Claire's illness and was struggling. I told myself family takes care of family. I did not know then that I was inviting a fox into the only home I had left. The first 2 years were quiet. He found part-time work. Rosie started 3rd grade at the elementary school 4 blocks away. She would walk home every afternoon and sit at my kitchen table and tell me about her day while I made her a snack. Those were the best hours of my life during that period. She filled the house with noise and drawings and questions, and I was grateful every single day. I noticed small things, slowly. My son-in-law began asking questions about finances. Not aggressive questions, careful ones. How does the mortgage work now that it's paid off? Did I have a financial advisor? What happens to the house in a trust versus a standard will? I answered honestly because I had nothing to hide, and because I thought he was simply trying to understand his situation, maybe plan for Rosie's future. I was a fool. He began suggesting I see a doctor about my memory. I had forgotten where I put my keys once. I had repeated a story at dinner that I'd told the week before. He brought these up gently, with what looked like concern. He mentioned to my neighbor Bill that he was worried about Walter. Bill told me this himself, a few months later, in a way that made me realize it wasn't the first time he'd said it to someone. He was building something. I just couldn't see the shape of it yet. My retirement account held a significant sum. The house was paid off and worth considerably more than when I bought it in 1999. I had a life insurance policy I'd kept current for decades, and a separate investment portfolio my wife and I had built together over 40 years of careful living. I am not a wealthy man by any grand measure, but by the standards of the neighborhood I grew up in, I had done well. He knew all of this. I had told him because I trusted him with my daughter's child. The conversation about the will happened on a Tuesday evening in October. He sat across from me at the dining room table and said he thought we should talk about protecting Rosie's future. He had printed out some documents. He had done research. He proposed that I update my will to name him as primary trustee over Rosie's inheritance rather than my brother, Thomas, who had held that role since Claire died. His reasoning was practical. Thomas lived in Arizona. He was here. He knew Rosie's daily needs. I said I would think about it. I did think about it. And the more I thought, the more uneasy I became. I called Thomas that week. I didn't tell him about the conversation. I just wanted to hear his voice. Thomas is 4 years younger than me, sharp as he's always been. And he asked me how things were going in that careful way he has when he already suspects something isn't right. I said fine. I said good. I believed it, mostly. 3 weeks later, Rosie came home from school on a Wednesday and didn't go straight to the kitchen table. I found her sitting on the bottom step of the staircase, still in her coat, backpack on, just sitting there staring at her shoes. I sat down beside her. I asked her what was wrong. She didn't say anything for a long moment. Then she looked up at me, and her eyes were very serious, the way they get when she's working through something heavy. "Grandpa," she said, "don't let him change your papers. I heard him on the phone last night. He said when you're gone, everything becomes his. He said he just has to wait, but he doesn't want to wait that long." The cold moved through me. I kept my face still. I asked her calmly who he was talking to. She didn't know she had only heard his side of the conversation. Through her bedroom wall, she had heard him say my name. She had heard him say the word doctor and the word evaluation and the phrase, "It won't take much to make it convincing." I put my arm around her. I told her she did the right thing telling me. I told her not to say anything to her father, that this was between us, that I was going to take care of it. She leaned against my shoulder, and I felt her breathe out like she'd been holding it for a long time. That night, after she was asleep, I sat in my study with the door closed, and I thought about everything. I thought about the keys, the repeated story, the questions about the will, the neighbor, the doctor's suggestions. I thought about the documents he'd printed out and the calm, careful way he'd presented them. He wasn't waiting for me to get old. He was building a case that I already was. I did not sleep that night. The next morning I called Thomas before 7. I told him everything, Rosie's words, the conversation about the will, the pattern of small moments I'd been too trusting to read correctly. Thomas listened without interrupting. When I finished, there was a long silence. Then he said, "Walter, don't change a single document, don't sign anything, and call David Chen today." David Chen was an attorney who had done estate work for our family years earlier, when our parents passed. I had not spoken to him in almost a decade. I called him that morning. He asked me to come in that week, and to bring nothing, no documents, no paperwork, just myself. He said if what I was describing was accurate, there were specific steps we needed to take in a specific order, and that the sequence mattered. I went on Friday. My son-in-law thought I was going to a doctor's appointment for a routine checkup. I let him think that. David was calm and methodical. He explained that what I was describing, the pattern of memory questioning, the will conversation, the positioning as caretaker, the apparent effort to isolate me from Thomas as trustee had a name. It was called undue influence. And in some cases, depending on intent and action, it crossed into elder financial abuse. He said the phone call Rosie overheard, if it could be corroborated in any way, was significant. He asked me if there were any documents I had already signed. There were not. He told me that was important we were catching this before any legal or financial change had been made. He said this was the best possible position to be in. He also told me to be very careful going home, to behave normally, to give nothing away. I drove home and made dinner and sat across the table from my son-in-law, and I talked about the weather and about Rosie's upcoming school project, and I gave nothing away. It was the longest meal of my life. Over the following 6 weeks, I worked quietly with David. We documented the timeline, every conversation, every comment about my memory, every question about finances, with dates and as much detail as I could provide. Thomas flew up from Arizona and gave a recorded statement about the conversation in which my son-in-law had told my neighbor Bill he was worried about Walter. Bill agreed to give a statement as well. David filed a formal complaint with Oregon's Adult Protective Services and notified the county district attorney's office. He also petitioned the court to have Rosie's guardian ad litem, a separate attorney appointed to represent her interests, informed of the situation. I also, on David's advice, installed a small audio recorder in my study with the understanding that Oregon is a one-party consent state, meaning I could legally record conversations I was part of. I didn't have to wait long. 11 days after the recorder was in place, my son-in-law came to me in the study on a Sunday evening with a new version of the trustee document. He said he'd had a lawyer friend look it over. He said it was straightforward. He set it on my desk and put a pen beside it. I looked at it. I looked at him. I said I'd need to read it first. He said, "Of course, take your time," and he sat down across from me. And then I believe, because he thought he had me, because he had been patient for months, and believed I was exactly what he'd been telling people I was, he made a mistake. He said, "Walter, you know Rosie needs this kind of security. You know you won't always be able to make these decisions. Your brother is in Arizona, and he's not getting younger either. You want to make sure the right person is in place before things get more complicated. You don't want the courts involved. You don't want strangers making decisions about your granddaughter." Every word was on tape. I said I understood his concerns. I said I would have my lawyer look at the document. His face changed very slightly. He asked which lawyer. I said David Chen. I watched him try to recall if he knew that name. He didn't sleep well that night. I could hear him moving around the house. 3 days later, David submitted everything to the district attorney. The recorded conversation, the documented pattern, Thomas's statement, Bill's statement, and a formal accounting of my financial holdings that established both the motive and my capacity I was fully cognitively sound, and multiple assessments, including one David arranged privately, confirmed it. My son-in-law was contacted by investigators the following week. He retained his own attorney. He denied everything, said the conversation on the tape was taken out of context, said he was only trying to help, said I had misunderstood. Rosie was interviewed separately by the Guardian ad litem. She told them exactly what she had heard through her bedroom wall, in her own words, in her own 9-year-old way, without coaching from anyone. She said her grandfather was not forgetful. She said he helped her with math every night and never got it wrong. I had to look away when David told me that. The district attorney's office charged my son-in-law with attempted financial elder abuse and conspiracy to commit fraud. Because no document had actually been signed, the charges were built around the attempt and the documented conspiracy. His attorney pushed hard on the word attempt, argued there was no completed crime, no actual harm. The judge disagreed. He was convicted on both counts. He was sentenced to 4 years in Oregon State Prison and ordered to have no contact with me or with Rosie for a period of 10 years following his release. Rosie came to live with me full-time. Thomas flew up for the sentencing and stayed for 2 weeks. And during that time, we sat at my kitchen table every morning with coffee and talked about Claire, about my wife, about the family we'd all been, and the family we still were. On the second morning, Rosie came downstairs in her pajamas and climbed into the chair between us and asked if she could have hot chocolate instead of coffee. And Thomas laughed the way I hadn't heard him laugh in years. I want to tell you what I've learned, not as a lesson written in a book, but as something I know now in my body. The way you know a thing when it costs you something real. A child who comes to you carrying fear is carrying it because no one else would. Rosie held what she heard for days before she told me I could see it in her face when I thought back on it. Those days before the staircase, the way she'd been quieter than usual, a little too careful. She was 9 years old, and she had already learned that telling the truth might not be believed, and she told me anyway. She saved my home. She saved the future I'd spent a lifetime building. She saved herself. Though she didn't know that was what she was doing, she thought she was just telling her grandpa something important. That is the only kind of brave that matters, the kind that shows up anyway, even when it isn't sure it will be heard. I have changed every estate document. Thomas is trustee. David Chen is on retainer. Bill next door has my phone number and his contacts under call if anything seems wrong, and I have his. Rosie is in 5th grade now. She still comes home and sits at the kitchen table and tells me about her day. Last week, she told me she wants to be a lawyer when she grows up because, she said, lawyers help people tell the truth officially. I told her that was exactly right. I told her she had been doing that since she was 9. If you are watching this and you have a child in your life who has come to you with something heavy, something they're not sure you'll believe, something they've been carrying alone, please put everything else down, look them in the eye. Tell them you're listening. They are almost always telling you something you need to hear. And if you are watching this and something in your own life feels like it doesn't quite add up, the questions that are a little too specific, the concern that feels a little too convenient, the person who seems to be building something you can't quite see the shape of trust, that feeling, I should have trusted it sooner. But I'm grateful I had someone small and brave enough to make sure I didn't trust it too late. Where are you watching from tonight? Drop your city in the comments, and if this story reached you the way I hope it did, I'd be glad to know you're out there.